Next slide, please. So welcome everyone to our 2020 TIEEN webinar. Today we're talking about improving your bottom line and resiliency and meeting ESG goals with new federal resources. So we have a very full program today. Our speakers are Gavin Dillingham, Eddie Trevino, Sophia Cunningham, and then Rob Klenner and Carrie Mertland are covering a range of different topics in this field, and we'll be discussing those in more detail as their sessions come up, as their presentations come up. Next slide, please. Just a few housekeeping details. If you're not one of the presenters, please stay muted and keep your video off.
We're asking about tank emissions.
And excuse me, please, somebody is speaking on.
Emissions are typically done.
Thank you. Please keep your video off and stay muted. And then also I should note that the speaker bios and the details of the webinar are included at the link that is shown on the screen, and that should be appearing in the chat as well. So I'm not going to be going through the details, going through a lot of details as I introduce people. You can go to the website and get more information there. And then finally, Q&A, please put your Q&A questions in the chat box, and we will address them as we're able to do so during the webinar. Next slide, please. Before we get into the discussion specifically about the federal resources, I do want to mention that this session is run by the TIEEN group, the Texas Industrial Energy Efficiency Network. And this is a network of publicly funded energy efficiency organizations. And so before we get to the discussion about federal resources, I do want to introduce the organizations and their leaders. And so first up is Kelly Herbert from SPEAR, the South Central Partnership for Energy Efficiency as a Resource. So Kelly, over to you.
Good afternoon. This is Kelly Herbert. I'm Acting Executive Director for the South Central Partnership for Energy Efficiency as a Resource, SPEAR. And next slide, please. We are a nonprofit organization that was created as one of 6 regional energy efficiency organizations in the country. We cover Texas and Oklahoma. We have our mission and vision here. We really work hard to educate and train individuals on energy efficiency in our area. We work in the areas of building codes, working with building officials and builders, HVAC installers, installation installers, et cetera, to train them on how to build a building properly and efficiently. We also work with City Efficiency Leadership Council, which educates and trains our local governments in the areas of energy efficiency. We also have a policy program that focuses directly on energy efficiency at the state and local levels in both Texas and Oklahoma. And I appreciate all of you being here today. Next slide, please. This is my contact information. If anybody else would like more information, I really appreciate it. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, Kelly. And Robert, could you put the information in the chat, please? Yeah, and that's good, thank you. And then the next one up is Kurt Middlecoop, who represents TMAC. So Kurt, over to you.
Sure, good afternoon. I'm Kurt with the Texas Manufacturing Assistance Center. We are a federally program funded initiative to work with manufacturers across the state of Texas. One thing that you may be interested in is we have a pollution prevention grant where we're able to deliver the economy, energy, and environment on-site assessments at no charge. So for this year and next, we have 20 E3 assessments that we could provide to any manufacturer within the state of Texas and or its bordering states. So if you're interested in that opportunity, please reach out to me. The goal of the training is to teach your team internally how to walk the floor and look for not only lean waste, but also learn how to incorporate other waste, which are the environmental waste and also the energy waste. So when we leave the company after that 2.5-day visit, the team has a nice list of improvement opportunities and reductions that they can initiate moving forward. So if you have any questions about that program, please let me know, because we only have the certain amount of slots. Once they're filled, then that's it. So it's basically first come, first serve. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed the presentation today.
Thanks, Kurt. And next up, we have Gavin Dillingham from ARC. Gavin, over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gavin Dillingham. I direct research for air and energy at HARC. And HARC, for many of you who don't know, is a nonprofit research institute up in the Woodlands, and we work on a variety of sustainability initiatives around air, energy, water, and climate. And a good bit of our work is kind of focused on building optimization, industrial energy efficiency, microgrids, resilience, et cetera. So excited to be a part of this and have an opportunity to talk about federal funding opportunities. Thank you.
And next up, we have Jim Eggebright, who joins us from the Texas A&M Industrial Assessment Program.
Yes, thank you, Alan. Yeah, we here at Texas A&M are involved in the DOE program, the Industrial Assessment Center. We go to manufacturing plants and wastewater treatment plants and do a no-cost energy conservation study for the plant. It's a confidential thing that we don't distribute to anyone else. Main purpose of the entire program is to quantify savings and implement, quantify savings and get the idea on what the implementation costs will entail for the various projects that we do. We do 25 of these assessments each year. They are all led by a staff professional like myself. I'm the assistant director of the program. We have another assistant director, Heather Lewis, and the director is Dr. Brian Rasmussen. And we are all part of the mechanical engineering department staff here at the university. Along with us on each visit, we have anywhere from 4 to 6 students typically, and they're all staff program students. They are paid by the university and earn wages in the program. The criteria for the manufacturing plants includes, besides being a manufacturing plant, that the sites have to have less than 500 employees and gross annual sales of less than 100 million. The energy costs need to be somewhere close to the range of $100,000 per year up to $3.5 million. And they have to have no on-site energy manager type staff. The main output of the program is a no-cost report that comes to the plant within 60 days after that site assessment. And it's entirely up to the plant what they want to do with the result of it. There's no further additional consulting or anything like that. And I'm done. Thank you, Alan. Hope everybody look forward to it now.
Thanks, Jim. And next up, the 5th and final member of the TIEEN network is PACE. And here to talk about that is Dub Taylor.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, Dub Taylor, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Texas PACE Authority. And PACE is a new financing option, I guess pretty new, originated in 2015 for industrial energy, water, and environmental projects, as well as commercial and multifamily. But we're here today to talk mostly about industrial. Next slide. Our organization, the Texas PACE Authority, we're a 7-year-old nonprofit. We administer PACE programs for local governments across the state that have elected to establish those programs. Currently, PACE covers about 72% of the state's population, the blue areas of the map you see there. And what is PACE exactly? It stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And what's missing off that acronym is the F for financing. And it's really a unique financing structure that allows long-term, low-cost, 100% private financing. I guess that got truncated there. These are private dollars and actually not governmental dollars, but they're enabled through a governmental security process. The types of things that can be funded are energy efficiency, water conservation, distributed energy projects. And the key to this is a local governmental assessment provides security for the lender to provide financing for a much longer term than they ordinarily would for an equipment loan. Next slide. So the industrial space, again, any project that can reduce energy or water usage or generate power on site potentially is eligible. Some examples here in the energy area that you typically would see on a plant site, and as well as water. All of these types of projects could be eligible for PACE financing. And the key to this, again, is this increases the property value and and with no capital investment by the owner. So preservation of internal capital for growing the business or increasing throughput is a feature. It generates positive cash flow immediately. The chart here shows the PACE option being the blue line compared to a conventional financing option and the orange cash flow perspective, as well as a self-funded option. So again, cash flow positive day one, and happy to visit with you about this. I think my contact information will magically appear in the chat about now. There it is. So thanks for joining us today, and hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thanks so much, Dub. And before I introduce or reintroduce our next speaker, I realized that I forgot to introduce myself right at the beginning, so I probably should do that. My name is Alan Rossiter. I'm with UH Energy here at the University of Houston, and we work with SECO, the State Energy Conservation Office, and they fund this program for TIEEN and the associated program called TIEEP, which is the Texas Industrial Energy Efficiency Program. We're able to run these webinars and other informational sessions and educational programs under that grant. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that right at the end of this webinar when we introduce our upcoming program for TIEEP. So at this point, I would like to reintroduce our speaker for the first part of our discussion of funding, and that is Gavin Dillingham. Gavin is VP of Research, Energy and Air Quality at HARC, and he will be talking to us on a beginner's guide to grant funding. And the idea behind this talk is that I'm sure many of the people on this call will not have a lot of background in government funding, and we thought it would be great just to give you a general overview of what it's about. But enough from me, I'll hand you over to Gavin. So Gavin, to you.
Great. Thank you, Alan. Once again, a pleasure speaking with everyone today. As we all know, there's a significant amount of funding that's being processed up at the federal level that's potentially making its way down to the state and regional local level here. And really the focus on this initial piece before we really get into the meat of things of the amount of funding that we're going to see, and some stories as far as, and case studies as far as how companies have secured this funding in the past, is just kind of really a brief overview of where can you get some good information and some strategies that where you really should be looking into as you're considering applying for these federal grants. Federal grants can be a rather arduous, complex effort, but if you kind of do it right and know what you're looking for and know what you're doing, it'll still be arduous and complex and difficult, but you can do it in a more efficient manner and make sure you meet the deadlines associated with this. And so first of all, the first piece that we're looking at here is just where you're going to get information. And of course, this is the Texas Industrial Energy Efficiency Network. So we're funding on, focusing on energy resources here. There's a variety of other sites if you're looking at other types of infrastructure, but this is just for the energy side. And so one of the best areas that we've used and that we've seen is the Energy Exchange. That's the EERE Funding Opportunity Exchange. There you can actually sign up on a listserv to get access to these announcements. But this is pretty much where everything gets listed for the DOE's energy efficiency, renewable energy, and pretty much any other kind of announcements coming out of DOE. Pretty easy to search and provides all the information in one spot. The other place to go to, and people are more familiar with just in general, is grants.gov. DOE has its own site there. Once again, it lists all the different funding announcements and also provides some strategies and guidance and direction as far as how to apply for federal grants. So when you're looking at resources, those are the two key pieces that you want to take into account. Go to the next slide. It's just the grant life cycle here. And sorry that it came out green. Huh, it was black on my slide deck. Interesting. Anyway, there are a variety of different phases that you want to look at, and just different stages. The pre-award phase, that's where most of you will be focusing at this point. And that's really kind of working on the funding opportunity announcement called FOAs. So we'll see a bunch of those starting to come out, and that's where you'll receive information as far as what funding is available, what are the terms, expectations, what is DOE looking for, the timeline, funding, et cetera. And that's where and I'll go more deeply into what all that entails here in a second. Then there's the award phase, and that can come 2, 3, 4, 5 months. really depends on the capacity of the department and the contracting manager there. And that's also where the negotiation happens and kind of the final determination of what's called your statement of program or statement of project objectives, and also statement of program objectives, the SOPO, also known also your work plan. That's where all that gets delineated and finalized. And then your post-award, where you're actually doing the work and doing the variety of wonderful reporting opportunities that are provided to you when you have a Department of Energy grant there. And so anyway, just real high level, those are the three main phases that you're going to be going through. If you go to the next slide. When you go to, and this is from the EERE exchange, these are the key documents you need to pay attention to. The first one is just the FOA itself, the funding opportunity announcement. That's about the 50 to 75 to 100 page document that you need to read through to make sure that you kind of see all the requirements from DOE. The Q&A piece, it's an Excel spreadsheet, but very important to pay attention to. People sometimes forget about that, but that's where all the direct communication comes from DOE. After they do some of the initial kind of informational webinars, that's where all the information goes to. And people ask a variety of really good questions that can very much save your grant if you are potentially going down the wrong track there. So once again, check that out on a regular basis. And then the full application piece there, the SF424, that's your budget, the statement of project objectives, the SOPO, that can be up to 20 pages, and that's breaking down your tasks and subtasks and can be very detailed and expected to be very detailed. Budget justification template, you need to be a quant or some sort or a very high level in the financing accounting world there to really kind of translate that. But in any case, that's the budget justification templates, an Excel spreadsheet. Takes a decent amount of time if this is the first time you're looking at to balance everything out. So make sure you give yourself plenty of time to go through that. And then there's the disclosure of lobbying activities, pretty easy to go there. Go to the next slide. Deadlines. Deadlines are very important. Concept paper deadlines or the actual full application deadline, there's no leniency whatsoever in this regard. Pay attention to these. They change. That's why it's important to keep going back to EER Exchange and seeing what those Q&As are doing, or to sign up to listserv to make sure that you're registered and you get these announcements, because DOE will change deadlines on you. And they will, and they do not really have, there is absolutely no flexibility. If you miss the deadline by 1 second, you've missed a deadline and it does not count. So very much pay attention to these. They're out there on the front page, on the title page of these FOAs, and need to be kind of melted into your brain when you're looking at these and you're doing your planning and making sure you're working back appropriately from those timeframes there. Next one. So most of the funding announcements come with a table that looks similar to this. This is actually from a recent Weatherization Assistance Program grant fund that came out from DOE. It'll give you different topic areas because DOE is interested within a FOA of different types of topic areas. Give you how many awards we're going to get from each one of those, the amount of funding for each one, the minimum, the maximum, the total amount of funding available, and the anticipated length of the project. In this particular case, 36 months is what they're anticipating is the max. You didn't have to go 36 months. You don't have to go up to 2 million, but just this is just parameters to keep in mind. Do not go over 2 million. And it's really kind of science and art to kind of define what that budget really looks like. Because one of the key criteria is the budget that you provide really credible in the way in which it's provided for DOE to understand that you can actually get the work done. And so if you propose too much for what you offer in your SOPO, you're going to have a knock against you. If you propose too little, they may not think you know what you're talking about. So it's a nice little balance there to make sure you're really honest with yourself of what that cost is going to look like and make sure you present the best budget based on your understanding of the project there. Next one. All right, documents required. These are all very much required and can take a significant amount of time putting together. Every one of them is important. You can say like, well, I'm going to focus more on one versus the other. These are all required. If not all of these are turned in, your grant does not get considered and it gets tossed out. So this gives you a really nice idea of the technical volume. Typically, they're between 10 to 20 pages. Resumes, keep them at 1 page. Letters of commitment and letters of support. So commitment are those that are participating on your grant. Support are those that really think it's a good idea and are kind of supporting and encouraging you. Statement of project objectives. Once again, that can be from 10 to 20 pages. SF424, budget justification. Those are 2 of your budget documents. You're going to have to do an abstract and a summary. summary slide. That's a PowerPoint slide. And then if you have a budget justification for subrecipients, that's typically grants that are over, or subrecipient that gets grants over $250,000, but it depends from time to time on the grant. And then a variety of other types of pieces in here. What's brand new with DOE is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan, the DEI plan. Brand new for these round of funding, and they're taking that very serious under their Justice 40 initiative. So do not just kind of set that aside and wait to the last minute to deal with that. Very important, very specific questions, and it's going to be a big piece in your contract proposal there. Next, just a quick thing here. This is an example once again from the Weatherization Assistance Program grant we just recently submitted. It's really important to outline things. They have some really specific criteria they're looking for. Don't overlook the criteria they're looking for, and make sure that you outline this specifically and answer each one of these questions as closely as possible. What we typically do is take this, we form it into an outline, and then we start filling in the spots associated with it. Otherwise, you end up missing pieces, you miss up, and then when you look at the criteria associated with the grant, you're not meeting some of their basic criteria. So it's very important that you take this outline, they give it to you, and very, very seriously try to answer each one of these as closely as possible there. So they give you an outline, use it, see how they weigh it, and see they give you these different percentages as far as how long each one of these should be. It's a really good idea to keep as close to that as possible because they don't want to read too much about your team. They really want to know about the project. And so next. So just some quick advice here. Do not propose an idea that's not of interest to the granting agency. I see so many times people come to us with ideas. They're like, oh, I think this will fit under the SPOA. DOE specifically states there's things they don't want to see. And if you submit something just because you think it's a good idea, they think it's a good idea and it's going to get kicked out. Make sure you have the appropriate registrations. SAM can take a considerable amount of time to get that registration done. So make sure you have your DUNS, and then also look at the FOA to see any other kind of registrations they require for that. The system crashes, I would say 48 hours is as far away you want to do to submit these grants. It's really key to make sure you get it in, because if you call them up and say, hey, the system crashed whenever I was trying to submit this, there's no leniency in that regard. So once again, don't be late. Track the FAQs and that Q&A piece that I mentioned in the EER very closely. It updates all the time. And then most of all, start early, be organized. Can't throw these things together in a week if you want to be successful and win them. It takes a lot of preparation, takes a lot of outlining, takes a lot of planning. So just make sure you take these serious as you put these together, because there's a lot of competition for these grants and a lot of people that are taking it very serious. And so it's a really competitive environment that you're working in here. So that's what I had to present today. Now we're going into more interesting, exciting discussions here. Where the money is.
That was very interesting too, and very good overview. So thanks so much, Gavin, much appreciated. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat. And I did notice there was one question actually from the earlier discussions, a question for you, Jim, if you're still here, if you can hear me. So the question from Bobby Lemaire asking what kind of equipment you look at in the assessment. So I'll give you a few seconds to answer that if you're there, Jim.
Okay, yes, sure, and thank you, Alan. We look at everything that uses energy, electricity, natural gas, which of course, motors, lights, boilers, anything that uses energy. So just anything.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
And a question for you, Gavin, asking here about, well, two different questions here. Number one, could you explain the difference between a cost match and a cost share?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, thanks, Eddie. I think you could actually do a really good job explaining the difference between a cost match and a cost share. The cost share is when we have, and we're actually seeing less of these come in now. But typically it's 20%, and so you have, but it varies from contract to contract. But cost share is essentially you have the federal amount, and then you have the cost share amount, which is the piece that you're contributing, and that can be contributions in monetary and non-monetary fashion that comes into the grant. So you'll see when you're looking at the SF 424 and the budget justification document, there'll be two columns. One will be for your cost share, which is your contribution and your partner's contribution to the grant, and the federal share there. And typically it's 20% of the project that goes in there. On the cost match, I believe that's more of kind of leveraged funding that you're trying to get into, but Eddie, actually, you probably could better explain the cost match stuff versus the cost share. I'm more familiar with the cost share side.
So Eddie's up next. He can talk about that. How about that? There was one other question here from Betty, and she just asked, what are the registrations for when you go through this whole process?
The registrations are to make sure that you're a valid entity that meets the specific requirements of the grant. So you're a domestic entity. If it's for nonprofits, that you're a nonprofit. If you're a university, that you're a university. It's to essentially, identify you as the organization that's submitting, that you're an actual entity that's legally operating within the United States under the requirements of the grant.
Great, excellent. Very good. So yeah, we need to be moving on, but that was an excellent introduction. So thank you so much, Gavin. And so over now to Eddie Trevino, Director of the State Energy Conservation Office here in Texas. And he is going to be talking about navigating the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for opportunities. So this is the new federal funding we've all been so excited about. So over to you, Eddie, to give us the lowdown.
Thank you, Alan. Hi, I'm Eddie Trevino. I'm the Director of the State Energy Conservation Office. To address Gavin's questions before we dig in quickly, is that on cost share, it's usually a percentage of the overall project, that 20% Gavin was talking about. And a lot of times cost match is, let's say that we have a $100,000 grant and we want a 20% cost match, then it's just 20% of the grant dollars that we're contributing. And that results in a different total amount of project cost. So just be careful when you see that. The good thing about the 424 is that if you get it wrong, it won't, and you require 20%, it won't let you submit. So that's the safe part that they have in the system. So watch out for that. Now, if you want to look at the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, you saw it was that Public Law 117-58. That's one way to search for it. Another way to search for it, it's called the IIJA, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Another way to search for it is the bipartisan infrastructure law. And it can be found using all three of those searches. The White House uses the bipartisan infrastructure law. The IIJA was written into the bill. And so that's the formal name that you can search by. Another way to search for the bill is by searching for the title that's in the title of this slide as well. And so what we're talking about is 5 years of funding for half of the available funds, which are the new funds that are coming out as part of the IIJA. Can we go to the next slide? Now you'll see there's $1.2 trillion over 10 years. Some of those funds you see are available for use over a 10-year period. $550 billion is new spending, of which half of it will go to surface transportation, and the other half of it goes to what's called enhancing the core infrastructure. So that's the basic breakdown of the bill. Next slide. And you'll see for the transportation side, you'll see this heat map of how the projects are divided, the different categories, the wide variety of categories, which includes anywhere from roads and bridges to public transit to safety and also to reconnecting communities. So it's not just one particular area, it's a wide swath of area. It's real obvious to see where the most of the funding is going to be spent. So if you're interested in those areas, that's where you're going to focus your attention. Next slide. In addition, there's going to be improvements, FAA investments. You'll see in the breakdown there's airport terminals, airport infrastructure, and airport facilities, of which there's a total of $25 billion that's available. At the bottom of the page, you'll see the hyperlink. If you're interested in participating in those types of projects, I'd go to those hyperlinks and that'll give you a good starting point. In the transportation side, we talked about where the emphasis is. You'll see there's sub-programs within the overall programs. And I'll give you an example. This is called the Bridge Investment Program, of which it's $40 billion. $12.5 billion is for a program called the Bridge Investment Program. And that's to rehab and replace critical and strategic bridges and economically significant bridges. And then you'll see the 27.5 billion is for a bridge formula program, and the formula program would be for distribution of funds to the state. You'll also see that out of that 27.5, there's a set aside of 4 billion, which would be to update or replace bridges owned and maintained by cities and counties. Now, one thing to pay attention to in all of these announcements and all of these funds are the funding mechanisms, because that'll tell you how to approach and who to approach when you want to talk about specific announcements and specific releases of information. There's formula grants. Now, those are grants that will go either directly to the states or to possibly local governments. There's block grants, which are generally can go to the states, but target local governments and county governments as well. Then there's competitive grants, which are a large number of grants in this cycle. There's also tribal grants. Those are grants specifically designated for Indian governments. The cooperative agreements are projects that you would work on with a particular agency or a particular laboratory. And then there's interagency agreements, which are between, is what it says, it's between federal agencies. And then some of the federal agencies will be having their own direct funds, and they'll have announcements related to their direct federal funding opportunities. Now, if you look at this particular map, you'll see that on the bottom axis is the agency. You'll see that on the vertical axis is how much funds they are receiving. And then if you look at the colors of the charts of each agency, you'll see how much in funding that they're going to actually use in formula funding, how much is in competitive funding, and how much are in other types of programs such as loans or that direct federal spending such as the agency programs. And you see that a large amount are either the black or blue, which means it's going to be either formula funds or it's going to be competitive funds. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities to participate as part of a team in the competitive funding arena. Now I'm showing you this. This bill was 1,039 pages long when it was enrolled and signed by President Biden. When you look at the bill, the thing you have to look for are the divisions and the sections. And so there's 11 divisions in this bill, and I'm going to show them all, but where I've highlighted the divisions is where you're going to be spending most of your time. So next slide. You'll see Division D, that's the energy section, and you see the different section numbers, and you'll see the categories or the titles of those sections. That's when you do your searches, you want to look for example, either battery processing and manufacturing by title, or you can look for those bills by section number. And if you search by section number, or if you see an announcement and you ask what section number it's under, when the individual gives you that section number, you'll see what category it falls in the bill, and you could go directly to that bill and find that background information. Next slide. So you know Division D is very important. You also notice that Division G is very important for you as well. That's a section called Other Authorizations. And look at the different categories. There's quite a variety of categories that are referenced in that Division G. And it includes cybersecurity, public-private partnerships. There's also particular categories that you really want to pay close attention to. And they include the Build America, Buy America, and Make It in America. Those are provisions in the bill that you'll have to comply with. And so make sure you understand what they're talking about in those provisions. Next slide. And then you go to Division J. That's the appropriations. When you reach Division J, that's going to tell you out of all of the other divisions, how much money each division is going to get. And within particular sections, it'll tell you how much money each section is going to receive as well. So if you look at Division E or Division G and you can't find the dollar amount, what you'll do is you go to Division J and that'll tell you the dollar amount that's going to be available. Now, recipients are going to vary. I've provided a list of potential recipients depending on the funding opportunity, and it could include one or more in a particular funding opportunity. For example, with local, it could be local and non-governmental organizations. So what you have to do is when you look at a particular section of the bill, first thing you do is you look at who the recipients are for that funding. Two reasons. One, it can tell you if you should get a team together and apply, you can apply directly, or it'll give you an idea of who you need to team with in order to submit an application. Or if it's a local government or a state or a tribal government, it'll tell you who you need to talk to find out more information about that funding opportunity, so that when it becomes available, you're sure to be ready to go to participate with the team. There's an executive order that was signed last July. It's called Executive Order 14008, and it's called the Justice 40 Initiative. The Justice 40 Initiative says that 40% of all federal funds have to benefit disadvantaged or underserved communities. And that's all federal funds going forward. That includes these IIJA funds. It includes any federal funding that we receive going forward. You have to provide a rationale of who you're going to serve, how you're going to measure the benefits of the community you're going to serve, because all of that will be part of your reporting requirements. So if you can identify underserved communities early in the process, when you're putting your teams together and when you're talking to local governments or other public entities of how you're going to approach that Justice 40 initiative, it's going to be very important. If you don't have any idea, it's going to be a challenge for you. You'll need to find somebody who has an idea. Now, Gavin talked about reporting requirements, and there's several reporting requirements you're going to have to be familiar with and become comfortable with in your process as well. The first is cost match or cost sharing. Some of these opportunities have no cost match. Some have 20% cost match. Some have 50 and up to 100% cost match. So the federal government's looking for private participation in these projects. So you have to be keenly aware of what the cost match requirements are and how your participation in the projects can contribute cost match to meeting these federal requirements. It's really important. There'll be quarterly reporting that agencies have to do, and cost match is a part of that. You'll see the Justice 40 initiative. We talked about that. You'll see the Buy American, that includes the Make It in America and all other American related activities. That's critical. Davis-Bacon is also going to be required. Be prepared to submit Davis-Bacon for anybody who visits a construction site and who participates in a project, because that's going to be required for all projects. And everybody that's going to be requiring them is going to be requesting that those Davis-Bacon reports are either submitted in an electronic format or in a PDF format. Very few entities are going to accept handwritten timesheets. So watch out for that and make sure that you've got your ducks in a row so that you can submit those Davis-Bacon reports. Historic preservation is always a requirement for all federal projects. And that goes through Historic Preservation Commission in the state. and NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Agency, and that act is a requirement as well. So if you're in a construction project, you're going to be disturbing dirt or ground, and you need to find out what the NEPA requirements are. There are categorical exclusions. You need to be familiar with those categorical exclusions so that if any of the services that you provide fall into those categorical exclusions, you can immediately tell your partner, you can immediately tell the public entity that here's a categorical exclusion that's associated with the services that I'm providing. It'll be a benefit if you can do that. Next slide. There's guidebooks. Now, the whitehouse.gov provided a guidebook to the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's between a 300 and 400 page guidebook that will give you all of the infrastructure categories and all of the projects that will be funded through this program. I've provided the link for downloading the guidebook yourself so that you can read it. Alan, I've also asked him to upload the document. What I've done is I have searched through the document using the keyword search of industry or industrial to focus on the opportunities associated with industrial uses or industry as well. And so he'll provide that upload a PDF document in the chat box, and so that you can download it. It'll make your search much easier. It'll tell you where to focus your efforts in looking for opportunities. And you can look through the whole book. It takes a while, but this will save you some time. There's also a couple of helpful sites in addition to the ones that Gavin provided. And these are specifically related to the IIJA. They're both located at the Department of Energy. If you look at the site that I'm referencing in the image below, what that site does is gives you every program by the program name. And so it's not by the section number, but it's by the program name. And it'll tell you how the number of dollars that are set aside for that particular program. On the left-hand side of the page, you'll see that you can sort through major categories if you're interested in a particular area and look and find information about those specific programs. Now on announcements, Gavin talked about the funding opportunity announcement. A lot of times there's two steps that happen. It's not a requirement, but a lot of times there's two steps that happen before a funding opportunity announcement. The first is a request for information, and it'll be associated with that funding opportunity. The second is a notice of intent. The notice of intent tells everybody, hey, there's a funding opportunity coming up. Stand by and be ready. So if you see the request for information, they're looking for additional information, and you can help shape that funding opportunity announcement. It's not required, but sometimes many agencies actually include that. The notice of intent is your heads up. It's getting close. The funding opportunity is coming up soon. You need to be ready. Start talking, get everybody together if you haven't already, because the funding opportunity is coming up soon. You'll see at the bottom that the administrative and legal requirements document that is provided for funding that goes to state agencies predominantly. For example, when we receive our request to submit an application for our federal funding, we always receive it in the form of an administrative and legal requirements document. Now, what that tells you is that the funding will go to us, and then what we will do is we have to design programs and how we're going to use the funding as part of our application process. And then once we receive approval for our program, immediately after that, you'll probably see either at the state level or at the local government level, you'll see requests for applications or requests for proposals. We'll immediately try to get those out on the street so that other entities will have opportunities to have access to these funds. Next slide. Also on the bipartisan infrastructure law programs page on the Department of Energy, you'll see the next step of the process. The first step, which is the program information. Here, you'll see those specific announcements that I was referencing in the last slide. For example, on the public school facilities, you'll see the announcements is for a request for information. You'll see the announcement date, and you'll see the response due date. So that tells you we're getting close to funding. So next up for this notice will probably be a notice of intent after the Department of Energy reviews all of the input and adjusts their program accordingly. So this tells you how close you are in the process. You'll see that an ALRD is it's been published for the Weatherization Assistance Program, and you can work your way down the line. And what the benefit of using this page is you see what programs are really close to hitting the streets. And you want to know what programs are really close to hitting the streets, because that's when you want to make sure that you're ready to participate in the process. And to Gavin's point, that's when you want to make sure that you have all of your information together to submit all of the required federal documents, your narrative, and everything else. So this gives you kind of like a clock that's winding down until an announcement, and you can keep up with the projects this way. Next slide. For example, in Division D in energy, we talked about that first. You see the section numbers. Let's go to the next slide. You'll see these are requests for information that have been issued. They were shown on that web page that I showed you before, but you'll see, pay attention to the recipients and pay attention to who's going to receive the funding, because those will be the people applying for the funds, and those will be the people that you need to talk to address, to see if there's an opportunity to participate. Now that the RFI is issued, if you're not talking to any of those entities to see if they're participating, this is a good time to establish those relationships. Next slide. And then here, the notices of intent have been issued for these following types of programs. That means they're really getting close to issuing the FOAs. So if you haven't established any relationship, or if you have any interest in those programs, now's the time. It's getting close for that FOA coming out. So you got to get ready. And that's how you follow the process and find your projects. So you're going to go to 2 slides because I have a duplicate slide. Now, okay, back 1 slide, please. And then this is for the ALRDs that are issued to the states. And here you see an ALRD is issued to the Weatherization Assistance Program. And you'll see the large amount of funding that's available. And so the next step is to talk to the Weatherization Assistance folks in the state and see what their schedule is for funding opportunities for hitting the street and how long that's going to take. So that's the process you're going to follow. Or go ahead and go to the next slide if you could. There's my contact information. If you have any questions, send me an email. I'll be happy to touch base with you. But if you follow that process, because this is a process we follow ourselves, you'll be able to keep up with the opportunities, and you'll be able to identify opportunities and potential partnerships that may benefit you and help you participate in the program.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Eddie. Very good overview there and very good procedure to follow as we pursue this grant funding. I don't see any questions in the chat, so let's move over and invite our next speaker to the virtual podium here. Sophia Cunningham, Director of Public Policy from the Greater Houston Partnership, is up next, and she'll be talking about the regional dimension of these funding opportunities. So over to you, Sophia.
Thanks, Alan. As Alan said, my name is Sophia Cunningham. I'm on the public policy team here at the Greater Houston Partnership. I just want to thank everybody for being here today and for their time. And I also want to thank the other panelists for their presentations. They've been really, really great. And I hope you all have found them to be informative as well. As Alan has said, I'm just going to run through a few slides, and I'll be happy to answer questions as we go or at the end. So please kind of consider putting those in the chat. I think Alan will also provide my contact information. So for my presentation today, I really want to be able to share with you kind of what to expect with the IIJA, when you should expect it, and then how we can develop a regional approach to this funding. A lot of the talk today has been kind of centered around getting your application ready, but I want to make sure that we're also thinking about this in how it interacts with other applications that may be going on in the region. So for those of you who aren't familiar, just as a bit of background, the Greater Houston Partnership is the largest chamber in the region. We cover 12 counties in the Greater Houston area. We are an economic development organization. We are an international trade organization, and then a chamber all rolled up into one. So I sit on our policy team, and my day-to-day portfolio is kind of managing the workflows of our energy and sustainability policy, and then also our transportation and infrastructure policy. So as we go into this presentation today, I would just encourage you to ask yourself, based on what you've heard, are there funds that you could see your company applying for directly? Or on the other hand, are there funding opportunities where you or your company could provide support? So I'm kind of thinking back to Gavin's earlier presentation where he talked about letters of commitment and letters of support. And that's really where we put ourselves at the partnership into the conversation. We are not direct applicants for any of this funding, but we do try and help connect the dots between direct applicants and then those who are wishing to support an application. So happy to answer any questions there. Can we go back one slide? Sorry. Just to kind of go over a few other things that we're working on at the partnership. We're really trying to understand what the community's needs are, and then how we can communicate those to who are going to be working through this application process. We're engaging in the public-private project prioritization process, whether that's at TxDOT or with various consortiums in the energy space and that sort of thing. And then the biggest piece of advice that I can give you that I think Gavin and others have really worked on pretty well today is that it's so important to follow the federal grant makers guidance. As those FOAs become available, we will have a lot greater understanding of just how these funds are going to flow, what the requirements are going to be, who's going to be a good fit, and how we can be successful. And then at the partnership, our role is really just to help coordinate projects between direct applicants. So our goal is to draw down as many dollars as we possibly can from the federal government through this IIJA, and to also be able to speak with one voice so that we can go and approach our congressional delegation and say, here are the projects that we support in our region. And we hope that you as a member of our congressional delegation will be very supportive of them as well. We can go to the next slide. So I just kind of want to go over a few other things to keep in mind. Mitch Landrieu, who's kind of the lead coordinator within the White House on the bipartisan infrastructure law, has released some guidance to cities and regions to help them coordinate and prioritize projects. So the main piece of advice is that we coordinate across public departments and then also with our metropolitan planning organizations. So groups like the Houston Galveston Area Council here in our region, Dallas and other cities also have great MPOs. And then we need to prioritize the capital needs and develop a project pipeline so that we are all kind of working together and understanding what are the key projects we're going to support, and then how are we going to support them. And then a lot of what we've been talking about today is just identifying federal funding streams that are a good fit. Landrew also kind of wrote that we should ensure that all of our kind of mobility projects are a part of the MPO's transportation improvement plan. So if you're interested in a project there that isn't in the plan, it needs to get into that plan. And then, you know, the state's going to be mapping sites for electric vehicles and alternative fueling charge stations. That's really important. That work is being done at TxDOT currently. And I'll just add that there is going to be a legislative hearing on May 3rd. So coming up pretty soon in a couple of weeks, where TxDOT will present that plan to legislators. And then a couple of other pieces of advice were just inventorying and mapping lead pipes. That's not the subject necessarily of our discussion today, but it is part of the guidance. And then working with the state's broadband agency to ensure that local needs are inventoried and then also mapped. So lots of planning and mapping in this guidance. We can go to the next slide. So I'm going to go through kind of double clicking on a few different funds that are available. And, you know, I would just encourage you to think about those questions I asked at the beginning. You know, are there funds that I could apply for directly, or are there funding opportunities where I could provide support? And you can think about how these funds could potentially apply to your business in the industrial space. This is not an exhaustive list. There's over 100 competitive funding programs, but if you could see yourself as being involved with these programs, they're just good to highlight specifically for the Houston region, but for other regions around Texas. So to go through these a little bit, I'll start with just the regional clean hydrogen hubs. There's been a lot of excitement about Texas in this area, or just the Gulf Coast in general. We do have the most significant concentration of hydrogen infrastructure here in Houston and along the Gulf Coast. So it makes natural sense for one of those hubs to be located here. But at the same time, as there's so much excitement and interest in this area, we also just have more to learn from DOE about what exactly they're going to be looking for and who is going to be a successful applicant in this space. There's also quite a bit of work in direct air capture and carbon capture projects, whether that's, you know, building a hub or also kind of building facilities that demonstrate the technology. And then there's also carbon infrastructure programs that help carry out a carbon dioxide transportation infrastructure, and then more funding for clean hydrogen electrolysis. So let's go to the next slide. I wanted to make sure I took a little bit of time to highlight a few funds that are focused on grid resilience. You'll also see kind of a discussion of smart grids here in the second piece. And then we've received quite a bit of interest in transmission facilitation, whether that's thinking back on Winter Storm Uri or just you know, the overall growth that we're anticipating in this state, and how we can make sure that we're providing affordable and reliable and resilient power. So next slide. I'll also touch just briefly on electric vehicles and battery funds, kind of moving down to the third block where you see the charging and fueling infrastructure grants. Those are kind of split into two buckets. And as I mentioned earlier, TxDOT is developing a plan that they'll be presenting to the legislature on May 3rd. So we can learn more soon about exactly where they've been mapping needs and how we could see these funds being used. There's also formula funding that's available for this, not just competitive grant funding. So next slide. I wanted to make sure I touched on transportation just a little bit in case it is of interest to this group. The main fund I wanted to highlight was just this National Infrastructure Project Assistant Program, which will support kind of regional or multi-jurisdictional projects of significance that may also, cut across several modes of transportation. So that there might be some opportunities there for you all to consider. And then finally, I wanted to make sure I also touched on port investment. We've seen a lot of great activity at the Port of Houston and other ports along Texas related to energy efficiency and decarbonization efforts. So it's good to see these funds as we think about growth and our supply chains as well. And then, is that the last slide? Okay, one more. So overall, I just wanted to give you a deeper dive on the available funding today. I hope I've helped highlight a few out of those long lists that we know exist. And then highlight also those questions from the start of just, am I a direct applicant, or could I also see myself supporting an application? And if I could see myself supporting an application, am I, getting together in a team and a coalition to make sure that we're delivering that application to the federal agency, but also groups that can provide support, like our congressional delegation. So the partnership is here to help. We enjoy helping connect the dots between direct applicants and others, supporters. So our goal, again, is really just to draw down as many federal dollars as we can through this time period, and to be of help and as a resource. So I think Alan will share my contact information if he hasn't already, and I'm happy to take any questions now. Appreciate you all being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. And we did put your contact information in the chat. Also, I put in the chat the simplified version of that White House guide that he mentioned during his talk. So if you wonder what it was, I just put in the chat, that's what it was. So yeah, any questions? I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now, but if anyone does have questions for Sophia, great overview of what we can be doing locally here, because obviously we want to get a lot of this money flowing into our local economies in Texas. So let's make sure that we follow this through and get these things identified and acted on. Any questions? So if you put some questions in the chat going forward, that's fine. We may have time to pick them up right at the very end of the session. So if you'd stay around, Sophia, and hopefully we can discuss this a bit further at the end. So thanks again. That was a great overview of what we can do locally and how we can focus. So I'd like now to introduce two special speakers, Rob Klenner, Senior Business Engagement and Strategy Lead at Baker Hughes, and Carrie Mertland, a co-founder at ICE, or ICE Thermal Harvesting. So we have two people here who have some experience from the industrial side of pursuing and acting on government grants. And so I thought it would be a great way for us to get an inside view of what's involved, especially if you're coming from the industrial side, to participate in these grant applications and then use grants to move your work forward. So I'm handing over to Rob and Carrie to give us the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything else about government grants.
Yeah,
Alan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Oops. Yeah. In fact, if you can stop sharing screen now, Lee, that would be good for a moment.
Sure. So maybe if it'd be helpful, I think we'll probably each just give you kind of a frame of reference of where we're coming at this from, because it's fairly different between Rob and myself. So I'm Carrie Mertland. I'm the co-founder of ICE Thermal Harvesting, which is a new startup. We're here in the Houston area as well. And we are a renewable energy company who is making heat to power cool again. So we have developed a system that converts heat into usable power on a distributed scale in a manner that's really effortless for clients to adopt. So we can apply our systems across a wide range of industries and applications. And we produce zero emission electric power from nothing but heat as a fuel input. One of these applications is taking heat off of oil and gas production from wells across various basins. And that's actually how we came across the opportunity for funding from the DOE, which was called the Wells of Opportunity. So an oil and gas operator reached out to us actually and wanted to talk about how we could help them. They said, hey, we've got some wells, we think they're pretty hot. But that's basically where, you know, our scope stops, and we wondered if you could do this. So at that point, we recognized that we had an opportunity to be the lead participant and applicant on a DOE grant, and we pursued that last year, and we were successful in getting that. So that's kind of where ICE is coming at this from.
Yeah, and I'll introduce myself as well. Thanks, Carrie. So Rob Klenner, part of Baker Hughes. I'm in the Energy Innovation Center in Oklahoma City. So we're very interested in going after government-based funding as well. I think it's a good perspective here to have Carrie and myself from a smaller organization and a startup and a larger organization like ourselves. I come from the GE background, so Baker Hughes and GE and the merger in 2017. We have a lot of different technology from the upstream oil and gas space, but also into what we call the energy transition space. So we see this as a very good opportunity for us to leverage government funding and how we can accelerate and innovate our existing products and bring those forward. And we are structuring internally too on how we have set up our organization to go after the funding, whether it's as a prime or a sub. But we do work collectively with universities and startups too on how we bring, I guess, really just transformative technology into our industry. So there's a lot of partnerships that are needed, and we see that as a very strategic opportunity to put into our proposals as we go after these. So Carrie and I were thinking about, we would just have an overview of what we see our challenges, what we see our pitfalls, and what we see our benefits when we start to look at these different funding calls as they come out, and how we start to think about putting in proposals and anything in between from challenges that we see organizationally. So maybe Carrie, just from your perspective, what are some of the challenges that you see when going after the government-based funding?
Yeah, sure, Rob. So the biggest one is certainly the time commitment, particularly, you know, coming from a startup here, there's only so many hours in a day. And I would encourage everyone who's going to embark on a grant application to set aside more time than you think you need. So I would say, if you're one of those folks who sees a deadline that may be 6 months out and you think I'll get started on this in 5 months, you're probably not going to be able to be successful with this. I speak from experience. But yeah, timing, you need to allot a lot of time to these things. So in our case, we are working together with both a partner in the academic realm and also, as I had mentioned, a oil and gas operator as well. So when you've got multiple parties working together, you're going to need a lot of documents from all parties that have to be submitted. And once you kind of get into the meat of digesting what's expected out of a FOA, you'll see that there's a lot of legal documents that could potentially need to go through a partner's legal department to get clearance to submit. So my advice would be right up front, go through the FOA, understand all the pieces of information you're going to need, and quickly delegate out across the team and across the parties who's going to be responsible for what, and very clearly assign due dates that are well in advance of when you'll actually need them to get those things in hand. I think that would be the biggest challenge I would really want people to understand up front. How about you, Rob?
Yes. Let's see here. Maybe Belinda, you can mute your microphone, please. We'll take care of that. Yeah, I think from our end, really the challenge is, timing of these. You have to be dedicated to the resources of what you put on. And so even as a large organization with commercial deadlines, it's these funding calls come out. Sometimes you have a little bit of a lead time, but asking others to prioritize this can sometimes be very difficult. One of the things, as well as, I'm not sure what organizations are listening in, but the hoops they have to jump through when it comes to foreign-based work and some of the manufacturing things that you need to start to think about. We have a lot of experts globally, but how they participate on this is not necessarily always clear. And so as you start to go through thinking about any foreign resources that may be in different countries that you'd like to leverage, you need to think about how to domestically have the right resources within the United States. I also did want to touch too that we do have partnership gaps every once in a while. So we do like to, work with universities, but sometimes we don't necessarily know who we need to go work with. Maybe there's a commercial partner as well. So a little bit of lead time on working with, if you have an idea, getting those partnerships identified very quickly within the proposal process can help you get this in a timely fashion on that deadline.
Yeah, those are good points. I guess maybe if we think about the pitfalls, Rob, what do you see as kind of some big pitfalls that folks could become victim to if they're not careful?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of the intellectual property and the manufacturing restrictions. You may have to apply for an IP waiver. So especially if you're a startup too, the IP is very, it's why you're going after this, right? So you don't want to allow the government to maintain those IP rights. You want to have commercialization. So making sure you understand how intellectual property is, what background intellectual property you have. And then also for us, it's really around maybe some of the almost the project management. Let's say you get let's say you win this, right? The project management, sometimes you under budget that. And so you need to be, you really just need to make sure you budget in enough time when it comes to the project management and the reporting. And there's a lot of updating. And if you have a change management plan, you may need to implement that. So as you know, every project doesn't go as planned. So you're going to have to understand, hey, if we have a change here, you're going to have to work with your contracting officer as well within DOE of how that plan is going to change. And so early on the proposal process, but also once you win these, very exciting, but you need to make sure you have the right project management plan in place and you follow that through. So Carrie, I don't know if you want to touch on any other pitfalls that you might see going through the funding process or through the execution process.
Yeah, Rob, I think one, you made me think of it when you said IP, but you need to make sure if you're partnering with organizations or even on your own, I guess, that early on you think about how comfortable you are with a lot of potentially sensitive information about your company or about subrecipients or partners companies being in the public eye. So as with these grants, I think it's very common that they expect the results of the work that you do under these grants to be available to the public and for public benefit, which makes a lot of sense. We had one instance where another large company reached out to us in efforts to apply for another grant. And so we said, okay, well, we'll dig in. We were going to be lead on that. And then we came back and said, okay, here's the information that we'll need from you guys about your operations. And we gave them a list and they pretty quickly looked at it and said, oh, well, there's no way that our legal department will ever let us disclose any of this. So just making sure that you know upfront what pieces of information are required to be submitted and just make sure that everybody's comfortable with the things that go into the public eye. Another pitfall I would say is the budget. So make sure that you do not have any issues on your budget. So all parts of the submission are very important, But I will say that we'd gotten advice from several entities and the DOE themselves that's basically said, any big budget issues or if things don't jive in your budget, those tend to be disqualifying issues. So make sure that you go over your budget very well and that everything looks really solid on your budget. Make sure that your costs are as accurate as possible. Don't undershoot, don't overshoot. And just make sure that you go through that with a fine tooth comb. I think that's probably about it that comes to mind for pitfalls at the moment, Rob.
Yeah, I was going to say on the pitfall side too, it's really get your internal stakeholders lined up early. We like to get our legal stakeholder involved very early, and we like to get our business champions involved very early, because they don't understand, you know, all the process and the overall, you know, they have the same questions, right, around IP and business and commercialization. So we like to bring them in very early. And I know Gavin showed a bunch of what are the documents that need to be put in. We'll put together a checklist very quickly and assign those as actions to different people so that we can streamline those. And we're not checking things off in a sequential order. So I think, you know, having those conversations very early is something that's definitely needed. So I think, you know, sounds very daunting, right? We have the challenges, the pitfalls. This is you know, these are the things maybe that can trip you up as you're going through the process. So we want to be transparent. But I think the major thing is this funding's out there, and whenever we get together with a partner, it's like, hey, this is a great idea, let's go after this. And then the next question is, well, how do we get money to go do this? Even as a big organization, right? It's like, you know, funding is always the big hang up, but I think the key benefit is the funding's there. But I think beyond that, maybe Carrie, I'll let you touch first on what are the benefits of going after this and expand upon that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Well, Rob, like you said, whether you're a large, well-established company like Baker Hughes or a small startup like ICE, whatever ideas you want to pursue, you need capital to do that. So I guess probably the obvious one for us, it definitely helps to have a little bit of extra capital to put forward the prototyping units here. So that's a big benefit for us, is just a little bit of help. Sometimes when you're putting together prototypes, they could be more expensive than sort of your commercial scale operations. So this is helpful in that range. But aside from that, from our perspective, it's helpful to be awarded a grant like this for a legitimacy sake as well. So as a small startup that isn't terribly well known yet, it's nice to have the DOE come out publicly and say, hey, you know, we're awarding this grant to these folks, essentially giving a vote of confidence to, you know, we think what they're doing is interesting. So, you know, not only the general public sees that, but potential clients see that. So we've had folks reach out since looking to do additional business with us just because they saw that we were awarded a grant and thought that, you know, it gave us some legitimacy. You know, it does also provide a little bit of marketing. You know, the DOE or whatever entity you're dealing with typically will make it public. They're happy to announce when they award funding like this. So I would say that that's another benefit, particularly for a small company like ours.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add just benefits wise. We develop a lot of different technology, and I think it goes back to just the, you know, if you're familiar with TRL levels, if we have something at a 4 or 5 or 6, and we're always trying to find out how do we get this out to the field, you know, who are the customers, and when these funding opportunities come out, it really gives us a good opportunity to help us accelerate and get out to the field and try some of our new technologies with key customers. So, you know, it's really acceleration, I think, on the technology that we're developing, and provides that catalyst. But we also thrive on the partnerships. And I think many times, even though we've failed in putting a funding opportunity, or maybe failed in getting funding, we've actually been successful on establishing a partnership with maybe another company. It's like, hey, not this time, we didn't get the funding, but we do see alignment with whether it's a university partner we've worked with, and maybe we didn't get the $1 million from the government, but we understand there's something here. So we may seed a particular project with the university and go after, anything around the materials space, say for hydrogen. We see that there's value here. Let's seed some project here, and maybe we'll grow that. And then the next time DOE comes out with something, we'll throw in a proposal, and hopefully we understand a little bit more, and we start to grow that working relationship. And then it's really just, seeding those ideas. So there's sometimes, the problem statements come into us, and customers bring a different perspective, but then DOE brings a different perspective as well. And so when we see these, sometimes we're maybe working on something that's a little bit different than how DOE views something. And so that kind of catalyzes within our group, hey, we never thought about how we bring this technology and that technology, and we start to pair them together, and we come up with a different solution to solve a different challenge. So we know that we have different technologies, but it also spurs innovation and ideas within us, and sees those new ideas, and we can go get external funding for that. So just thinking about time, Carrie, is there anything, I guess, what's your last word of advice? And then I'll kind of do the same, but maybe to the audience here, what do you want to share as a key message and takeaway to them?
Yeah, one bit of advice I think I would give is make all of your goals within the project very SMART. So, specific, measurable, and have a very clear method of how you're going to measure the achievement of or miss of those goals, and also what the expected outcome of them is. So it's similar to, most of you have probably been through, corporate kind of check-ins where you have to rate your performance and performance reviews. And it's very similar in terms of, you want all of your goals to be very specific and measurable. And it's very much the same with a grant application. They want to see very measurable, clearly defined what is success, and what will be the gate for going on to the next phase of the project, and how will we quantify what we see as a success. I think that would be the biggest one. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, I think it's just being proactive and getting out in your network. How do you almost trying to see the future? Who do you need to be partnering with? Who do you need to be proactive with to really come up with a good project? Almost thinking about what the solicitations will be coming out in the future. But I think the main thing, just don't be discouraged. If you almost have to think you're going to get 1 out of 10 of these. So the success rate, it's very, very competitive. So if you fail the first time, don't give up. Continue to be proactive in how you go after these. Learn as you go, and as you start to put these in. From experience, we've put in many different concept papers, and we have been told, hey, great idea, but don't apply. So, or great idea, but this is what we like, this is what we didn't like. So I think it's you're only going to learn by putting in applications and concept papers. If you can be a reviewer, I think that will help you understand and learn by reviewing concept papers and proposals. You're going to see what potential winning ones look like. So I think it's being proactive. It's being, finding those partners, but then don't be discouraged. Everybody is not winning on these, right? It's 1 or 2 awards. There's a lot of people putting these in. And so as you learn, you'll be more successful in the future. So Alan, that's kind of what we wanted to cover today, and everything across, and give some words of advice. So hopefully if there's any questions, we'll be more than happy to answer those as well.
Yeah, appreciate it. That was great. Now, I'd heard that comment too about 1 in 10, and I was pretty discouraged at that point myself, but that was a good bit of advice. Thank you. So I see a question from Joseph in the chat here for you, Rob. How do you get to be a reviewer?
That's a good question. You know, I know people have been reached out directly by some of the different funding agencies within DOE on how to be a reviewer. I don't know, Carrie, if you've been a part of a process, but I know people have reached out directly to other people I know and, hey, do you want to be an upcoming reviewer for these? There may be a portal within DOE itself to submit your name on how to be a reviewer, but if anyone else from the previous speakers knows a specific process, feel free to chime in here. But for me, it's been kind of you know, they find you somehow and we'll reach out to you on reviewing these.
Yeah, and I had the same experience actually some years back. Yeah, just out of the blue reach out. Anyone else have any insights on that? Any one of the panelists, or actually anyone in the audience, if you have other insights? Okay, other questions for any of the speakers? Well, certainly to you, Rob and Carrie, that was wonderful. You know, so getting the real lowdown on personal experience with these things. I think that was a hugely valuable set of insights for all of us in the audience here. So thank you so much, and to all of the panelists, everyone who's presented. This has been a really wonderful sweep across the whole realm of government funding, looking at the basics that that Gavin introduced at the beginning through the IIJA that Eddie talked about, and also the regional focus from Sophia, and then let's say the two of you just giving your experience from the inside on the industrial side of it. I think that's just been a great arc, if you like, looking at this whole of the realm of government funding. So thank you so much. Lee, if you could bring back the slide deck, please, just where you paused it, because I did want to just do a quick wrap up, and specifically to just give you the heads up for our next event in the Texas Industrial Energy Efficiency Program. And this will be our Energy Forum. This is a hybrid event coming up next month, May 5th. And so the information also is in the chat. I think Rohit put it in a little earlier, and I might just re-enter it now as well, just for anyone who missed it the first time. So if you're able to come in person, if you're here in the Houston area, it's at the Bougainvilleas out on Westheimer, or hybrid, as I say, there is also that option. And if you follow the link that's in the chat, you can get to our registration page, both for hybrid and for in-person. So that pretty much brings us to our time, unless there are any other questions anyone wants to ask. Going once, going twice. Okay, I guess that does bring us to the end of the program. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and hope to see you all again soon in one or other of our other events. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.